Said she's planning on being in person.
There's James. Wow. Yeah, that's right. It's okay.
All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started now. Thank you everyone for joining. We'll call to order here. So do a quick round of attendance. Bill Sage back.
Suzanne Dirksen back.
Rita Russell, City Council.
Jenny Nolan.
Jackie Lowe, Finance Director.
Tyson Thornburg, Budget Financial Analyst.
James Surratt back, and great to be here in person.
Josh Roach, Deputy Director of Utilities.
Casey Allard, Deputy Director, Business Solutions for South Platte Renew.
Sarah Stone, Deputy Director for Business Solutions for the Utilities.
Peter Van Rye, Director, South Platte Renew and Utilities.
Steve Ward, City Council.
Peter Echo, Budget Advisory Committee.
Josh Newell back. All right, and on the phone.
Sean Lewis, Tim Dodd, Deputy City Manager.
All right, full house tonight. Approval of last month's meetings, the March meetings. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, they're approved. So tonight we're going through sustainability. So thank you all for coming. And then we have a few members' choice to add on. We won't make it late. Promise, but a few things have come up that we gotta throw out there today. So we'll bring that up. But please go ahead and we're ready when you are.
So I believe Tim will actually be kicking us off with.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Tyson, for asking me to do this. So sustainability is our 7th outcome area. It was one that was added, I believe, in 2020 in that iteration of the strategic plan. I think we've come a long way in 2.5 years. We started in, I believe, November of 2020. We met with City Council to start to formulate a sustainability plan that was approved right around Earth Day in April of 2021. After that point, we had a commission for a long time called, blinking on the name, but sorry, Sean, can you help me out? I forget the name of it. KEB, sorry, Keep Englewood Beautiful, like the National Keep America Beautiful. So that became the Sustainability Commission. And then we also hired in early 2022, the city's first sustainability coordinator, Mel England. So Mel works out of the city manager's office. And really her job is twofold. Number one, she does some of, I guess, what I would call her own projects that are part of the sustainability plan. And then number two, she facilitates discussions and programs and initiatives related to sustainability in the other departments. So things like utilities, SPR, public works, really across the board. And so we're really happy with the way the program has developed over time. And obviously, I think Peter has said this many times, but really what his departments do, at the core really is sustainability, is why they're tied to this tonight. And then you see some of the metrics that are in development. So these are, we're really working to try to develop. We have some metrics that are more operational. We've looked at, I guess I would call aspirational metrics from other cities that have very robust and long-term sustainability programs. So these are a few of the things we're working towards. Mel is really an expert in data and tracking. And so this is really kind of our starting list that we hope to develop in future years. And then you see here the sustainability section, which is very robust. I think one last thing I'll say too, as I mentioned, part of Mel's role is working with other functional departments. And so while you see a lot of projects here, there are other projects that tie into sustainability that may be in other sections such as infrastructure and transportation, but they're also key to sustainability and complement the work of sustainability. And there's more here. We did make, I should say, City Council did make some changes. A lot of them were suggested by Peter in terms of moving some of the water projects to infrastructure and transportation. But many of the projects that you see here do remain in the plan in this section. And that's it.
Okay, I'll take over, I think, if that works. So I'm Peter Van Ryn, I'm the director for utilities on South Platte Renew. And I've got half of my management team here today, which is Casey and Sarah and Josh. So Sarah and Josh are the two deputy directors that are in utilities. And then Casey handles essentially business solutions, so all financial and planning matters for South Platte Renew. Casey and Sarah interface quite regularly because SPR is such a large financial aspect of the Englewood Sewer Fund. Like Tim mentioned, there's a significant amount of what we do from a water perspective that is still in the sustainability aspect. A lot of that is tied to our water efficiency plan, which we just updated and is adopted this year. And so that has a number of goals associated with reduction in water usage and you know, things like garden in the box, some of the turf replacement programs. So those are all things that are covered in the sustainability aspect of the strategic plan relative to the water system. Then there's the infrastructure piece, which is just keeping the systems running. So a lot of our projects that we'll talk about today are actually projects that keep the systems running, but they also contribute to a sustainability aspect of goals that we've identified in the water efficiency plan or on the South Platte side. Like Tim mentioned, South Platte is basically one big sustainability organization because that's what we do. We take a raw material, which is wastewater, and we turn it into 3 beneficially used materials that we return back to the environment or we sell to Excel. And so the amount of actual waste that comes out of that area or that South Platte Renew is about 1 or 2 roll-off trucks a week that go to landfill. Everything else is treated and returned to the natural environment in a way that continues a cycle of beneficial reuse. So from a sustainability standpoint, that's pretty much what South Platte is, a sustainability focused organization. Okay, let's get into some background. So from a utilities perspective, we'll start there. We essentially provide drinking water and wastewater collections. Stormwater services is a utility within the city. However, it is actually administered through the Public Works Department. So today we're only going to talk about water and wastewater. You can see what we have from in general from major infrastructure elements. We've got a lot of pipe. We've got overhead tanks, the big white tanks that you see. We've got some other tanks. We've got pump stations. We've got booster stations. We've also got infrastructure that's in the mountains. We've got water supply infrastructure. So there's a broader set of infrastructure just beyond what's in the city of Englewood. From a wastewater perspective, our wastewater is actually a little unique in that the northern 2/3 of the wastewater collection system of the northern 2/3 of the city has the wastewater collection system that's part of the City of Englewood Utilities Department. The southern third, approximately, is part of what's called South Englewood Sanitation District, and is actually run through South Englewood Sanitation District. So if you generally live south of Quincy, you probably flow to South Englewood Sanitation District, which means you have a district that runs your collection system, but you have a treatment system that is essentially South Platte Renew. So I live in that. I am literally one house off the boundary. So if I were one block or one house to the east across Lincoln or across Logan, I'd be in the city outside of South Englewood Sanitation District. So it's a unique thing about the wastewater infrastructure that, what we ultimately do is we actually contract back and provide a lot of the services to that district for cleaning and televising and things like that for the sewer system. They are responsible for capital replacement of those mains, so lining projects, things like that. Next slide. In the past year, we've accomplished quite a few things in advancing the things that were identified in the 2020 master plan process. So we did master plans for water, sewer, and stormwater. First comprehensive master plans that were done, laid out. Essentially master plans are a big gap analysis that look at here's where you are today, here's where you potentially should be if you're a modernized utility, and here's the things you need to do in between. And so we, over the last 3 years, have been executing on a lot of those gaps. And just in the last year, one of the biggest ones from a funding perspective is WIFIA, which is Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. We closed those loans this time last year. Actually, Sarah got news today. So on the water loan, this is sewer loan closed with a no issue. The water loan, we actually ran into a challenge because of SHPO, which is State Historic Preservation Office in Colorado. So they had an issue with our lead service line replacement aspect of the WIFIA funding, that they were concerned that when we dug up those lead service lines, we were going to somehow disturb a cultural resource. So that delayed our closing of that loan last year from April to May. And we only closed the loan with a caveat that we couldn't actually draw any funds on it until we actually cleared that issue with SHPO. We got that clearance today. So it took 11 months to work through this. And essentially what it means is that when we are in certain sections of the city replacing the lead service line, we have to bring in a cultural monitor to watch us dig up the lead service line to ensure that we don't disturb some cultural resource. So it means we can get to the money. That's probably the most important piece of this. Whether we think that we're going to necessarily preserve a lot of cultural resources or not, we'll see once we get going, but at least now we have access to the funding. So that's a really big issue. Regulatory compliance was a real issue when I started as director 3 years ago. We had a number of issues. We had violations, and we had to send out some postcards because we missed some deadlines. We have a lot of that resolved now to the point where we have a regulatory group in utilities. So we have essentially 3 positions that are dedicated solely to ensuring that we are complying with regulations and staying on top of regulations, because basically everything is just getting more regulatorily stringent for us. We have lead service lines, which is the program I was talking about. That is driven by the state of Colorado now that we are designated a large utility, which occurred last year. And then we also have PFAS, which are forever chemicals. So we are paying attention to what the regulatory pressures are going to be associated with that. It's going to mean it's going to affect us in 2 areas. 1, in the water we produce, and 2, in the solids that we produce as part of cleaning the water that we produce. So we're monitoring that both at Englewood Utilities and at South Platte Renew, because we have the same issue with the solids at South Platte. City ditch piping, this is a really big one that is associated with our taste, odor, and hardness. This is a significant initiative to help us essentially improve our source water quality. Essentially what it comes down to is water in Chatfield is a lot less hard than water that's pulled from Union Avenue pump station in the Platte. So the hardness goes down significantly. We also think that just the source water quality in the summer, if you've ever been down by Union Avenue and the Platte River Trail in August, the water doesn't really, it smells like a summer river without a lot of water in it. And so we think if we can tie it back to Chatfield, we'll actually get a better source water, which will then help us in our treatment process, and also help us in that hardness aspect, because right now we don't have a process to remove hardness. It's cheaper to just get to water that is less hard than it is to build a whole softening process. So eventually, the last step in anything that we do in taste, odor, and hardness would be a softening project, probably 5 or 8 years from now. I skipped over sampling stations, so this is a direct result of the boil order that we had a couple of years ago. That essentially was the result of our estimate is that that was the result of a service line connection that had a leak in it. And the way we used to take the samples is we take them off the side of the house and the hose spigot. It's a historic way that utilities used to pull samples of the distribution system. So we have to pull 30 samples in a month, every month, to ensure that the system's safe. And what we think happened was when we turned on that faucet, it sucked some of that water that was in that meter pit leak and pulled it right through. And then that's what caused us our problem. We figured that out. And what we've done is we overhauled our system so that we now have sample stations at the meter, which is about as direct connection to the distribution system as you can get, to ensure that we are testing our distribution system, not someone's internal home plumbing. There's a huge risk vulnerability there because we don't know what people do with their internal home plumbing, and when we run the sample through their home plumbing, that's what can create these problems. So that was a significant step in modernizing the utility. LAS conversion that's a chemical conversion that occurred. So we use ammonia to help with the disinfection process, and we used a pretty dangerous form of ammonia historically up until this year, and we converted to a less dangerous form of ammonia, which is LAS. So aqueous ammonia is what we used to use. That's the kind of stuff that if there's a leak and you're in the room, it can kill you. So this actually is a much more inert, stable version of ammonia, and we made that conversion, which is safer for our employees. The filter interface project, if you ever heard me talk about the system at the water plant that we were going to eBay to get our parts for, that was this. We don't go to eBay anymore because we have a new system. So that project got completed last year, which is a big success. And then the South Reservoir dredging, we have solids that have built up in that reservoir for probably 50 years. And we're dredging that down to clear that back out to reestablish the volume of that reservoir. We did our first phase of that last year. We're going to execute another phase of it this year. And then ultimately, we're going to improve the solids handling building of the water of the Allen treatment plant away from what is a belt press, presses the water out of the solids so that we dry them out, haul them off, to something that's more modern, like a centrifuge or something like that. Okay. So you can see, essentially, as we have evolved in 3 years from a utility that wasn't doing a lot of investment, didn't have a lot of staff, to a utility that's trying to tackle a mountain of issues that have built up over 35 plus years. And in doing that, we've staffed up, we've also ramped up our capital. But what you can see is we aren't there from an execution perspective yet. So we had an amended budget last year of 23 million, which is what, if ideally we had everything up and running and we could execute on, we would have spent 23 million last year. Instead, we spent a lot of the year recruiting. We've spent the last 3 years recruiting to fill positions. We are actually pretty close to being, I would say we're probably about 92% filled in terms of positions. And we've got some stability in our workforce. And then the capital side, you can see that we haven't spent a lot yet. And that's just a function of, as you're ramping up a large capital program from less than $1 million a year to close to 15, or depending on lead service line aspect, up to $30 million a year. But that doesn't happen overnight. There's an incremental process in that. The first couple of years, there's a lot of time and energy spent in not just staffing up, but also design. So you don't see a lot of project expenditure during the design phase. It's when you get into construction. We're going to start hitting heavy construction this year and next year. So what we'd like to see is that number contract down to a point where at South Platte, we had the same issue 3 or 4 years ago, and now our capital execution, I think last year was 93%. So we were executing 93% of the budget, which our target's 95, so we were pretty happy about that. With the enterprise fund, if we don't use the money, it just goes back to fund balance, and then we just reprogram it to then continue to move forward the investment in the water utility based on what the identified needs are. So it's not like the money, it's not like we lose the money. And on our capital program, as well as our financial plan, we will, over the next 5 years, be definitely drawing down that fund balance to a point where we reach a stable amount of revenue coming in, immediately going out into capital investment. Next slide. Sewer fund, somewhat similar. We were ramping up from a staffing perspective. Capital, that 8.9 million, that's half of the capital for South Platte Renew. So you're seeing there was an underspend. Some of that is actually sub-capital in the Englewood Sewer Fund, but you can see there was an underspend. And again, that doesn't, we don't lose it. It just goes back to fund balance for sewer fund. And then as projects execute over from a timing perspective, we just redraw on it. So the money doesn't go away. You can see there's some debt service in there. We have some loans that I believe that the sewer fund loans retire soon, right? Don't they retire? 2028. So our sewer fund loans retire in 2028. Our water fund loans actually retire in 2032, I believe. And so that's where, as we retire those loans from the past 20 years, we'll be moving towards WIFIA and then ultimately the infrastructure money in the state revolving fund to pull new debt that will help us fund these capital investments. Next slide. I think we've talked a lot about this. We have a mountain of aging assets that we're trying to triage and address in a manner that doesn't, that causes us to put the money in the right spot at the right time. And each year that goes by that we have a better handle on the system, we can redirect that money towards the most immediate and highest risk needs. So we're, each year that goes by that we manage this capital plan from the outcome of the master plans, we get more field intelligence, we get more data as it relates to where we should be putting that money. So these capital plans that we'll go over, actually they do adjust year to year, which is what a capital plan should do. Is you should be looking at it on an annual basis to plan it out, but also move it based on where the priority need is. Taste, odor, and hardness is one of our most significant priorities because it is the thing that you all probably experience the most as it relates to water. So we have a concerted effort, not just on the city ditch project, but modifications to how we are operating the plant, as well as that settling pond. There's a significant contributing factor, we believe, that's coming out of those ponds at the Allen plant that we are working on technology and approaches to address. And so it's not just one thing, it's multiple things, and we're trying to attack them all. It's not all just build more stuff. It's actually operate and maintain existing stuff in infrastructure in a way that allows it to mitigate that issue. We talked a little bit about regulatory pressures. So that large utility designation occurred last September. And essentially, if our current population, which is about 34,000, and what's called our non-transient population, which is people who come into the city and work on a daily basis and leave, like the hospitals and some of the industry and things like that. When you take those two population numbers and you put them together, if you exceed 50,000, you now become a designated large utility. And our numbers hit 57,000 last year. So we're 34,000. And then we had 23,000 non-transient population, so that's people coming in on a daily basis. So if you think about the water system, we serve essentially 57,000 people the water that we produce on a daily basis, whether they live here or work here. And that's what drives that designation. Two big results of that are, one, the lead removal program, which we are now working with the state on an actual approach to. We are now on a clock as opposed to before. We were anticipating it, working in advance of it. So we are on a clock as it relates to the lead removal program. We've met with the CDPHE. We've also met with the EPA on this. And then the other piece is, the other aspect of it is we have to do more samples of the distribution system. And so we implemented that as well.
So coming out of the designation, though, it's really more regulatory.
Yeah, it's basically the state now sees it's okay, you're not some small utility. You're a larger utility that impacts their threshold, which is 50,000 people.
Okay.
So once you exceed 50,000, I don't think there's an extra large utility. I think if you just hit 50,000, it's like you're now regulated as a utility that impacts that many people. And the unique thing about Englewood is we are a full service utility. If you look at Denver Water, so Denver Water from a water perspective surrounds Englewood Utilities. And so if you're over at Southgate, or if you're down at Centennial, or if you're in Arvada, or if you're in these other areas of the city, they're ultimately, I think Arvada, let me verify on Arvada, but they essentially are retail providers, and Denver Water is the source water provider. City of Englewood, because we are years ago did not join Denver Water, we are a full service water utility. So we go from water resources, water supply in the mountains, all the way through retail delivered to the customers. And so that's where we experience these types of issues, much like a Denver Water. Whereas if you were to just go to one of the retail district providers around here, they don't experience that type of issue because it's ultimately a Denver Water issue. So it's a uniqueness to the Englewood water utility.
Peter, are
Yes.
there any other benefits to being considered a large utility for the city?
I don't know that there's a benefit.
Okay.
I think it just really drives regulatory oversight.
So it's really more regulatory.
It's regulatory oversight.
And more of it.
And more of it. And not only more of it, but it also, once you cross that threshold, there's no longer voluntary compliance with some of these things, the most important of which is lead service lines or lead in the water. You now cross over into what a study that we're undertaking right now, which is called optimal corrosion control. And so it's essentially a way to ensure that the lead service lines right now are fine because they have this, it's actually a benefit of having hard water, is they create this calcification on the inside of them that protects the water user from the lead line because that's built up over time. If you take it back to Flint, the thing that happened with Flint was those lead lines had that calcification on it. And then what they did is they switched water sources. And when they switched water sources, the pH of that water source changed. And what it did was it leached out that calcification and then basically dissolved it to the point where now the lead was directly in contact with the water that was going to the customer. So it was good for many, many decades. But as soon as the water source switched, that's what created the problem. Fortunately, our water source is stable and our pH is actually on the more, it's a higher pH, which drives, which reinforces that essential coating as opposed to leaching it. So, yeah, so that's it's one of the aspects where the hard water is actually good for us.
Moving to the Chatfield or increasing the Chatfield source water won't be a concern for us, I assume, once the lead piping has been.
No,
Or
well,
immediate concern.
well, and so that's part of what the optimal corrosion control study ensures, is that whatever as we look at our source waters, we ensure that whatever source waters we have, that we are essentially treating that water so that when it goes into the distributional system, it's optimally protecting basically that layer.
Okay.
And the way Denver ultimately landed on, Denver Water, who went through this whole process with the state, they ultimately landed on a pH adjustment to make sure you keep a higher pH, which protects that coating. And then ultimately to protect customers who had lead service lines, they have the water pitcher program that is a whole program that they stood up. And so for us, we're probably looking at some kind of a similar approach because our system is very similar to Denver's, built at the same time. We have the same issues around what types of optimal corrosion control we want to use, such that their program is actually a good model for how we can easily take the work that they've done and essentially replicate it here.
I won't ask anymore.
No, it's
I
fine.
appreciate your.
No, it's fine. I'm usually used to going in like 10 minutes. Am I taking too long? I didn't know what my timing was. Okay. Okay, so next slide. Oh, and well, I guess the last one is staffing pressures. I think we're doing pretty good actually as it relates to this. The staffing market is definitely difficult. Sarah is actually a Deputy Director of Business Solutions, but she's also acting Deputy Director of Engineering because the previous Deputy Director of Engineering left in April of last year, and we've tried to recruit that position for a year, and we can't get anybody to. I made an offer to someone, they stayed at their existing organization. We had two other qualified candidates, one of which applied, and we contacted a week and a half later, and they'd already taken another job. And another one we contacted, and they didn't respond to us, so we assumed that they probably took another job. So we're constantly trying to evaluate how we structure the staffing in a way that allows us to continue to move forward, but also acknowledges the difficulty in recruiting some of these positions. Engineering positions are with the infrastructure money that's being pumped into the sector, every consultant out there is looking for engineers, every utility is looking for engineers. So it becomes one of these really, it becomes difficult to recruit, but we've done a fairly decent job of not just at Englewood Utilities, but South Platte Renew, recruiting people. And the next aspect of that is just making sure that we stay market current so we don't lose people to other organizations.
Before we move to the next slide, Peter, I'll just say, I find these photos very helpful. As we're conducting public outreach on, why is my water bill increasing and what are we actually working on? These are areas that the members of the general public don't normally see. This pump, for instance, I don't know if you can tell us what year the rusty pump was actually manufactured and installed. But we talked about that briefly when I toured a lot of the water facilities when I first came on the council. But this is one of the big challenges we're facing is there's a lot of obsolete technology still in the system, or older technology that's aging out of service that needs to be replaced. And it's in areas where the general public will very likely never set their eyes.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the exact pump, but we have pumps at one of our pump station that are original equipment from 1964. And so they've been rebuilt, and they've been rebuilt, and they've been rebuilt, and they've been rebuilt. And there's a certain point in time where there's a diminishing return on rebuilding stuff. And so that's where, when we did the first master plan, that's where we said pump stations where we need to focus a lot of our energy. Well, as we've gained more knowledge over the last 3 years, yes, we need to focus on pump stations, but we have all these other things that are actually probably higher priorities. And so we're looking at ways of instead of just demolishing the existing pump stations, building brand new ones for $15 million, we're looking at ways to address that specific pump in a way that modernizes that, but maybe the building's good enough for now for the next 5 or 10 years as we're trying to address lead service lines and we're trying to address pipe networks and 6-inch lines and all the other. It's all a prioritization exercise.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So a couple projects to City Ditch Piping. If you're free tomorrow, we are having our open house on City Ditch Piping. It's going to be in the community room. feel free to stop by. You'll get to see what our conceptual alignments are for the 3 sections of the ditch that we will be piping to close the ditch from, essentially close the ditch from Chatfield all the way to the Allen plant. And it's about 6.5 miles from Chatfield to the Allen plant. 4 of those miles are already in a pipe. We're now closing up the remaining 2.5. There's also, if you know where at Mineral in Santa Fe, the southwest quadrant there is an area that we'll be developing. Littleton's working on a project with 2 developers down there. We are working actively with those developers to get those sections of the ditch piped as part of their development. And so they want to move them out of the alignment because basically they run right through the middle of their developable area. We say, great, move it over here and stick it in a pipe, and we'll say yes. And that's essentially what happens. And so it's a really great way to work with the development community to get them what they're looking for so that they can develop that land, but also get us our goal in the end, which is to get the pipe in, get the ditch in a pipe. And so both of those are actively moving forward right now. It's not part of our project, but it's part of the larger project as a whole. You can see we're utilizing a methodology for construction, which is construction manager, general contractor. It's different than doing 100% design, sending it out to the street, bidding it to the construction community, and then seeing what comes back. This approach in this construction environment actually gets us a better result for a more predictable price that we can plan for. The challenge with design, bid, build is you don't have a contractor there along the way saying this is constructible, this is not constructible, you should do it this way based on their experience. The designer says, this is how we're going to do it. You bid it out. And what the contractors do is they bid it out, and then they just start saying, they start finding all the places for change order, change order, change order, change order, change order. And this is a more collaborative approach. We've implemented it pretty successfully at South Platte Renew. City Ditch is our first major project at Englewood Utilities that we will be approaching the construction with this methodology. There are still projects that we will design, bid, build out because they're more predictable. But when you get into projects where there's a lot of variability in what the ultimate product can be, this has been proven to be a more effective way to get the projects implemented. Additionally, everybody's heard about supply chain in the last 2 years. What this allows us to do is if we have long lead items, like some valves, some big valves and things like that take, half a year to procure. Your starting date for that procurement isn't the day you accept the bid after the design. It's 3 months in, you do maybe 6 months in, you do an early design package that releases all that long lead equipment, and you get all that ordered so that by the time the design completes, those things show up at the project site. So you're not waiting. You're basically running in parallel as opposed to stacking on the timing and delaying the length of the project. You can see some of the timing on it. We expect to be done in 2025. If you'd like to learn more, come tomorrow.
What time is it tomorrow?
4 to 7 in the community room. Yes.
Director Van Ryn, I have 2 questions
Sure.
related to the city ditch. First of all, I don't know if it was you or your department at a previous presentation noted that I think there was some resistance among residents in unincorporated Jeffco, if I recall correctly, about covering the ditch affecting its historic character. Has that, I assume, been overcome by the fact that we're moving forward with phase 1 of this?
So it's actually Littleton.
Littleton.
Yeah, so there's 2 historic preservation societies that are very interested in this project because they are concerned about preserving the historic nature of the ditch. And so one of them is Englewood Historic Preservation Association, or Preservation Society, and then Littleton. And we've been working with them and meeting with them for the last 1.5 years as we've been developing alternatives. So have we fully resolved things? I wouldn't say necessarily yet. But I think some of the alternatives that we came up with are ones that help to meet their goals, but also help us meet our goals. So there are areas of the ditch where we're going to straight line it because it's just cheaper than to follow the ditch alignment, which then preserves that ditch, that segment of the ditch corridor to be observed as a relic of the ditch. Now, it likely will not be flowing. In some cases, it will be flowing. In some cases, it won't be flowing. It depends on where on the ditch. The reason why sometimes it will be flowing is because we still have contract users that we have to deliver to, and we'll be using segments of the ditch to do that. There's also segments where the ditch might be used for stormwater conveyance. So it changes from a constantly flowing water supply to a runoff conveyance system. And then there'll be sections of it where the ditch is, it's just a ditch without any water in it. And then there'll be sections where we obliterate the ditch because that's the only alternative. So all of, that's actually what the public meetings are designed to get feedback on. Project team has looked and figured out what we think is the optimal approach, and we'll present that, get feedback. If there are alternatives that people say, hey, can you avoid this? Then we can cost it out, and then that becomes something that if there's additional funding to help us avoid something or help us modify the alignment to protect something, we can look at that. I don't know that we're going to need to do a lot of that because we've actually preserved a lot of the ditch. Actually, yes.
So do they know that council has already approved closing it in?
Yeah, they're aware of in 2014, there was an agreement between the city of Englewood Council and the city of Littleton Council that says both councils acknowledge that Englewood's right to pipe the ditch and the intention someday in the future to pipe the ditch. That was in 2014. And neither council will, or Littleton will support, or both councils will oppose any historic designation of the ditch. And so that agreement between the two councils has been conveyed to them and they understand that. So with that, we are also trying to work with them to try and see to the degree to which there's a section of this that's near, a section of the ditch that's near downtown Littleton that I think they want to make an interpretive park, maybe an art park or something like that. And we think there's some possibilities that we can work with them on that. There's also sections where it just makes sense not to go down the ditch alignment because we have a better alignment. And so those just end up preserved ditch and we'll turn them over to whoever wants to maintain them. And then, as we get a new easement for the new ditch. So they are informed of the position and the agreement. And we've also at the same time committed to be good neighbors and good stewards of these resources that have been around for 150 years.
So there are things that we can do that won't.
Yeah, just the proposed layouts that we have now preserve more sections of the ditch than we had originally anticipated. Just because it is actually the most cost-effective way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So my second question is a little bit selfish. I think I erroneously disclosed to folks in my neighborhood that I serve on this committee. So one of the most common questions I get is, when's our water going to taste better? Is it fair to say that with the completion of phase one here in 2025, that's when there will be a notable or discernible change in the taste and odor and hardness of the water?
So our hope is that you'll see it this summer. Because we made some process changes at the Allen plant in terms of how the treatment process was working that we think is going to help improve things. Now, it's not going to, we anticipate incremental improvements over the course of several years. City ditch is another major increment in that improvement. So we're making immediate changes right now. The hardness thing is one of the most significant things that the city ditch project will address. And we can't address hardness right now until without a softening system at the Allen plant, which is an expensive system. Right now, our only way to address hardness is to change where we're pulling the water. We also think there's a taste and odor issue aspect to that. Additionally, the way we run water through the system and through the treatment plant, we've made optimizations and improvements to how that functions. And we're hopeful that this year people will start to see at least a trend towards improvement.
I will share that at our next council.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So incremental.
Are we getting rid of all the dead end spaces? That will help also, correct?
That's correct. So we have dead end lines out there and right now our first contract to have a contractor close those loops or put a blow off on the end of them is underway right now, right? They finally started. So they've been a bit of a challenge to get going. I'm not sure if we're going to work with them again. But ultimately, that's the first step is the looping and then blow off so that we can, at least from an operational perspective, go out there and if we put a blow off on, which a blow off is essentially a hydrant at the end of the line, is go out there and flush more often if there's not a demand on that line. So if there's not a big demand on the line, it'll sit there for longer and then it just gets old. But yes, that is underway as of a few weeks ago. Right?
Yeah, they've got 2 sites done.
Yeah, they finally got going on it.
Thank you.
Going back a little bit, what is the historic preservation value of City Ditch? And what's the motivation of the preservation? Because, you know, not to be rudimentary, but to me, it's a ditch. Like, why do you guys have to go through all the extra steps? And is that something that a council or other influences could help mitigate some of that strategy of how you're approaching it? Because you seem to be handling it very appropriately, but is there something more to the ditch that I'm not aware of? I mean,
So really the reason is it's the oldest man-made structure in Colorado. It's the earliest man-made structure where in 1864, people got out there and built this, and it was a ditch that supplied Denver. It's called City Ditch because it supplied City Park and Wash Park and those areas. And so it's got a real historic connection to what developed Denver into what it is today. And so it's preserving that to the degree that we can preserve any amount left, because the whole thing's been chopped up and you know, it used to go all the way out to City Park. But when T-Rex came through in the early 2000s, they basically cut it, said, we're not going to cross I-25 anymore. And so now it ends at Harvard Gulch. And so to the degree to which we can preserve it for that, that's what they're going for.
gotcha, that makes sense. Kind of the same, was it the WIFIA though that you had to bring the cultural resource to monitor that? And what are the concerns around the cultural impact to what that project was doing?
Well, so we made a strategic decision on City Ditch. We originally had it in the WIFIA funding. And then as soon as we did that, it's called a 106 process. So it's a federal process to essentially notify and get feedback on historical preservation. And so once they did that, we saw the groundswell of interest in this. We saw how those processes can delay your projects by years. And so our decision was we pulled it out of WIFIA. So City Ditch is funded purely by rates and fees. It is not funded by WIFIA, and that is because if we did, we wouldn't be talking about completing that in 2025. We'd probably be talking about completing it in 2028 after who knows how much money addressing cultural resources. Now, what we did leave in there that we didn't think was going to have a cultural impact was lead service lines. But as soon as we, January, February timeframe, when we were working with EPA to finalize the loan, SHPO said, hold up. No, we think there's historic value to your old crappy pump stations. And we think there's historic value to the ground where the lead service line is. And so they determined that there was no historic value to the pump stations, which is good. But they ultimately said, Our concern is that if you start digging in the ground, you might hit something. And so that's what resulted in this year-long delay to be able to pull on it. And ultimately, we had to essentially mitigate how they wanted us to mitigate.
So it becomes more of a regulatory bureaucratic site supervisor in case something happens versus actually expecting something to happen, and it's just tied to, so it's not something deeper than a true cultural thing that we'd be concerned about disrupting. It's just sounds more regulatory and bureaucratic.
Yeah.
Based.
I think it's a very, they are basically looking at a very, they're trying to mitigate all possibility that we could potentially hit something. So I've been on projects in the past. We had a project, I used to work at Parker Water and Sanitation District. And we had this project, we had this 4-mile pipeline that went essentially from E470 right around the Peoria area down to where Ritter Hills Reservoir is now. So there's a new water plant there. And so it's a 4-mile pipeline, and we were within the last 200 feet of completing that pipeline. And we were going through a drain, like a stream that was right next to Lincoln. And we had a cultural monitor on site, and they dug up the top of a skull and some bones, and it was determined that they were about 4,000 years old. And essentially what it did is built 3 miles and 9.95 tenths of a mile. And we got to this last 100 feet, and essentially it caused a 2-month project delay, and I think it ended up costing us about $300,000 to go through. And we brought in archaeologists, and they excavated down and they cleared it so that we could then put our pipe through. And then what they do is they take what they found, and there's an interment area for Native American cultural resources where they then intern it somewhere in the foothills. So in that situation, we were in a drainage way where you typically see those types of things. So our likelihood of hitting something in the streets of Englewood, maybe,
Probably less if it's already been dug up.
yeah, and who knows? Maybe we do, and that's what they're trying to protect for.
That helps context with it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
As a person who has degrees in cultural anthropology, if you encounter those historical preservationists who are claiming that City Ditch is the oldest man-made structure in Colorado, you might refer them to any of the 19 Pueblo nations of northern New Mexico, who would point to a lot of archaeology in the southwest part of our state as predating City Ditch significantly.
I'm going to do that.
You might want to help shift their paradigm here and talk about pre-contact and post-contact.
Thank you. I need that. Okay, next project. This is Big Dry Creek Diversion Project. This is the project that has taken a long time to execute, but we're getting close. So essentially what this does is it diverts the water coming down Big Dry Creek downstream of the intake at Union Avenue. And the reason for that is when they're in the summer, especially if there's a rainfall event upstream at Big Dry Creek and there's a runoff event, that can have a real significant impact in a short period of time on the water that we're taking in Union Avenue and cause our treatment process to get out of whack. We don't like spikes of things, but that runoff spike, because it's so directly, so close to that Union Avenue intake, is why that project was originally conceived back in 2016, 17. And so phase 1 was completed in 2018, which is the pipes in place. We've had to do a lot of work to get this project ramped up again and running again. And what we determined was a lot of it still hadn't been designed. So we're hopeful that we actually get this done by next year. And it's a good thing. It gives us some flexibility as it relates to, again, being able to help control source water quality impacts. Next slide. And then space. Not the final frontier, the Alpha. And so here, what we have right now, and this is utilities somewhat across all, this is just the first step in it. Essentially, right now, utilities, because we've staffed up to meet the challenges of the utility that we have right now, we are in 4 different trailers. So we have 2 trailers at the Allen plant. We are about to assume our 2nd trailer out at Service Center. And so one of the first steps that we are initiating is, if you look, so this is on the north side of the Allen plant. We essentially have there's a area where there's only a 1st floor and it goes to the 2nd floor. And so we're just going to build the 2nd floor and add in a conference space, I believe 5 offices. And then where you see it says existing break room, we just modified that to turn that into an operator workstation room. So everybody that has a workstation. And then immediately to the right of that is the control room. And so we're going to connect that operator workspace room to the control room, modernize the control room. And essentially all the treatment operations will be able to be housed on that north side of the Allen plant. And so that project we have underway. Moving forward, we anticipate probably construction on that this summer. And you can see there's a little bit of work to the south there. That's creating some space for 3 maintenance personnel for the Allen plant and modernize some of that. What's not on here is there was a historic big break room that's actually a conference room right now. We're going to turn that back into the break room. So we'll update that. So that project is, that one's underway. Okay.
South Inglewood Sewage Districts.
Yes.
And maybe this is also a question for council and the city, like quality controls over that. Where does that fall under the city of Inglewood? How do you guys interact with them? Or are they just an independent metro district that has their own thing and you just deal with them as an independent metro district?
So they are they're a separate metro district. They're one of the customers of South Platte Renew. They are one of the agreements that the city of Englewood, so South Platte Renew serves 19 connector districts outside the 2 cities that own it. So Littleton and Englewood, co-owners, 50-50 joint venture. 19 connector districts that are served, 11 of which have agreements through Englewood, 8 of which have agreements through Littleton. Mm-hmm. South Englewood Sanitation District is one of the ones that has an agreement through Englewood for treatment. For collections, they have a portion of their district boundary that coincides with city of Englewood boundary. And so those residents that live in the city of Englewood are actually sanitary sewer customers of South Englewood Sanitation District for their collection of sanitary sewer. They also have a number of areas that are outside of the city of Englewood that are part of that district. So the district's bigger than just that aspect. They meet at the Englewood Library monthly. I attended one of their meetings last year because what I was trying to gather from them was their approach to lining their sewers. Because after talking to their district manager, which is essentially an engineering firm that they contract out to, they said, well, they have lined all the sewers of South Englewood Sanitation District customers that are outside the city of Englewood. So essentially, we've all been paying, but from a prioritization perspective, they lined everything that was outside the city. And now they're going to start lining inside the city. So I went and just asked, how did that determination occur in terms of prioritization? Because essentially it's going to be 14 years for us to get ours lined, which is fine. But as it relates to the rest of the district, it's all done, and essentially City of Englewood customers are last. So I asked that question and it goes back to historic, you know, city, district managers that were in place for 40 years that. knows how that all- Yeah. We interface with them on a yearly basis as it relates to rates because the way they assess their rates is directly tied to how we assess our rates. We've asked them for their methodology. We have struggled to get their methodology. What we do know is that last year, they adjusted their rates down, which meant savings for a number of customers like myself. And I don't think they made a dramatic change this year, right?
No, I don't. We did.
Yeah, so, so how do we interface with them? Well, so that's the aspect that, so we also have a contract where we provide those sanitary sewer services for them. Essentially, so Josh's crew goes out there and flushes them and CCTVs them and those kinds of things. And to be frank, it's a terrible contract for the city of Englewood. We have looked at ways to modify our compensation for that contract, but the way it's laid out right now, I think they're getting a pretty good deal. It was renewed, I think it's, was it 10 or 20 years?
20.
And it was renewed in 18 or 19. So they're open to the idea that they recognize that it probably costs more for us to provide the service than we are charging them. It's something that's on our list of things to fix.
So since it's coming with South Platte Renew, in the future, how can we prioritize, protect, take better quality control over Englewood citizens through it? Or is that dealing in the contract language, the lawyers will hash that out to see what they can figure out? Like, it seems that, and I guess in kind of thinking of what percentage of Englewood citizens are not getting direct services completely from Englewood Utility, and what's their experience been as citizens? That we should be concerned about short-term and long-term, like you're describing with the discrepancy of improvements with the pay discrepancies, where if we as now a wider city are undercharging our services, that doesn't help. And so I guess.
So the South Platte Renew piece is different. So those contracts, we actually fixed those a couple of years ago. What we did, we did a complete outside service charge analysis. Sarah led this effort, and essentially we changed how we charge those outside districts. So there's an inside city rate, which we pay for treatment. This is for treatment. And then there's an outside city rate. And we essentially did it according to industry standard and realized that after we did that, the inside city customers' rates went down because the outside city customers' rates went up to conform to industry standard approach for charging large customers of a system that's owned by a particular entity. So we fixed all that. The part that is unique with South Englewood Sanitation District, and I think they're probably the only one the biggest one that we have this issue with, is that sewer collection side of it. So that's just the collection pipes, the sewers in the streets. And I would say it's about a third, just roughly, it's about a third of the population, maybe a little bit plus or minus. And essentially they are, from a collections perspective, customers of South Englewood Sanitation District, residents of the city, customers of South Platte Renew as in-city customers of South Platte Renew. So it's very complicated. So now you can imagine if you're someone who gets Sarah's group who gets a call on their bill and says, I don't understand all these charges. It does get very complicated because they are just one district of 11 that we provide billing services to. Again, uniqueness about City of Englewood Utilities. So Sarah's team of customer service actually bills a population that's probably approaching 170,000 people, as opposed to a population of 34,000 people, because she handles all the billing for those districts. And that's an annual bill, but on that bill is not just the treatment charges, but our other charges are on those bills, right? I mean, there's other things on those bills. And so you could be way down by County Line Road and I-25 and get a bill on you get your annual sewer bill, and the call comes into her staff. Because it says City of Englewood, and because we do the billing on behalf of Southgate for that.
And so in South Englewood, you've got multiple billing rates in city, out of city. Other districts don't have the overlap with city, so that's more straightforward billing. And then all that funnels back up to you to answer the questions because you do it centralized through our billing systems.
Yes, except there's the Big Dry Creek Interceptor charge, which is one that actually applies to multiple groups, South Englewood Sanitation District, South Arapahoe Sanitation District, Southgate. So there's a thing on the bill that says BDCI, which is the interceptor that runs through the valley that basically transports the wastewater to South Platte Renew. And so that's an additional charge that's on, I don't know, 4 or 5 of the districts because they're all users of BDCI. South Englewood being one of them. So if you're on South Englewood, you're seeing all these different charges, and this is what's unique about trying to explain the bill to the regionalness of South Platte Renew, the billing of which comes through the City of Englewood for the Englewood connector districts.
So best we can, where we've got control, we're definitely considering citizens versus non-citizens through the systems. Ultimately, there's old contract language in the old Metro District history that we just got to navigate.
I know that we probably have talked about this before. Is there a way, especially for the residents in Englewood, that we could buy back their section of the South Englewood Sanitation District so that they would be billed the same as all residents in Englewood?
So interesting. That was something that we started talking about. I think Josh met with South Englewood last year. And they said, hey, would you what do you guys think about just taking this over and being a part of your infrastructure? And we said, great, let's talk about it. And so as part of those conversations, we teased out the fact that they had lined all the stuff outside of the City of Englewood, which means for the last however many years, they've been collecting money from the City of Englewood residents, lining all the outside. And then they came to us and say, hey, we got a deal for you. Why don't you take your sewer back? At which point we figured this out. We teased this out. I don't think it was malicious, but we did have to tease it out of the discussions, which ultimately why I went to the board meeting. Because I was trying to figure out, is this some kind of a strategy to basically say, hey, we got our money out of Englewood. Now our system's good. So, and it's not that malicious, but we wanted to make sure that we understood. So as a result of those discussions, I think your answer to your question is yes, in 14 years. After they line it all and it's all been completely brought up to standard, at that point in time, I think it does make sense to bring it over into the City of Englewood. But right now, because the residents have paid so much for so many years to line all the stuff outside, now we want to have all those residents pay to line the stuff that's in, and so the timing's not right. But that's exactly where we were going. It's like, let's take it. We're like, maybe not.
So the other areas that are outside of that district, are they lined? Have we lined them or no, we haven't lined those either?
In the city?
Yes.
So we're just embarking on a lining program. So our first step is to get a baseline CCTV of the entire system, which Josh has got that underway right now. Yeah, so it'll probably take half a year to get that complete. I imagine sometime this year. So that establishes our baseline. And then what we'll do is we'll prioritize the lining program, which is an annual program to go in and say, here's $500,000. We're going to line these because they are the highest priority. They're cracked clay lines, they're joints that are out of alignment, things like that. And so the first step is getting that baseline CCTV, which we now have, or we will have this year. And then that'll tell us where to put our energies. And then with the ultimate goal of doing the same thing that South Englewood did, which is ultimately lining the whole system. Because once you line the system, now you've got it basically set up to last for another 50 or 60 years. So it might be a 20-year program to do that. But it extends the life of those systems for 50, 75 years.
Thank you.
Yep. Great questions. If I've conveyed nothing about South Englewood Sanitation District, it's very complicated. It has taken us a while to sort it out, because it is very complicated. Okay.
It's nice when we have the oil advisory with the last year's incident, so there's benefits to being on a separate system.
Yeah, well, I think we hope that, we anticipate that that'll never happen again. Okay, South Platte Renew. We'll talk a little bit about this. So covered a lot of this, but here's a map of our service area. You can see it goes, that brown area is Roxborough. So it goes all the way south, there, you see that faint area, which is Chatfield Reservoir. So it extends miles south of Chatfield. Additionally, the area directly south of Chatfield, which isn't on this map, but is contractually served through Roxborough, is Sterling Ranch, which is developing down there. So they have a contract with Roxborough to then convey wastewater all the way to us. I know they're working on a system, or they're working on an approach down there to essentially treat the water to a level that they can keep as much water up there in the upper part of the basin, because they have a reusability plan, and then send essentially solids down to us, which actually is a perfectly good utilization of infrastructure that we have at South Platte Renew, and we'll charge for services, and it's a good way to utilize existing capacity in our system. So the yellow is Southgate, that goes all the way essentially down to Sky Ridge. Purple is Ken Carl. So you can see it's a pretty, and then orange is Littleton and green is Englewood.
Southgate, does that bump up against 25?
Yep, that's 25 that you're seeing there. That's that. I think we have like one little piece, like one little small section that crosses 25 and comes over. But for the most part, 25 is our eastern boundary. The gap that you see in the rectangular gap that you see in the bottom of the service area, that's essentially Highlands Ranch. So they have their own wastewater treatment plant, discharges in Marcy Gulch right near Santa Fe and C470. Yeah, so there's some stats about us. Next slide. We just completed our chemical phosphorus and UV disinfection project. And so this was driven by the state. We had regulations we had to meet. It's called Reg 85. They're nutrient regulations. So they're looking at phosphorus and nitrogen, ways to drive down the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen that we're discharging in our treated water. We essentially, Reg 85 is the first step in that. The heavier lift is what's called Reg 31, where those limits go down by a factor of 10. And essentially right now we have a long-term program. It's called our voluntary incentive program that we're participating with the state. And for every year that we treat below the current regulatory limits, we gain a year of delay in implementing those Reg 31 limits. So the Reg 31 limits are substantial. We think that right now we think they'll hit, if we fully utilize the VIP, they will hit in the 2035 to 2040 timeframe that we will have to be building the systems to address that. And our estimates right now is somewhere around $200 million. We're going to be taking parts of the plant that we utilize today and basically leveling them and creating new technology, utilizing new technology, because the current technology of the plant does not treat down to the level that we need to meet for Reg 31. So long-term strategically, we are participating in this VIP system incentive program to give us 10 years of delay and time to build towards whatever that ultimate solution is to meet Reg 30, 31. This year, we completed the requirement for Rig 85, which we were supposed to be online by June. And so it is online. We also converted from chemical disinfection to UV disinfection, which helps us not only from a chemical usage perspective, but also essentially helps us keep nitrogen out of the system because we disinfected with chloramines. And so we were basically taking nitrogen out of the system and then injecting it back into the system and then neutralizing it. By using UV disinfection, we no longer have to do that. So we can just pull even more nitrogen out of the system as part of the process. So UV completed its 15-day test a week and a half ago, fully up and running, working great. So we're pretty excited about that. That was a $19 million project that is now in its punch list. So very successful. We participated in a EPA project. It was a workforce compendium. So they've done these workforce convenings across the country. They did the first one they did, I think, was in DC. The second one they did one just a year ago or so in Castle Rock. But in the meantime, they were looking for examples of organizations that are addressing workforce needs. They have 4 pillars of the workforce need, and there are 2 that I remember most: are recruitment and retention. And we are a case study under retention. And so essentially what we did is we told them all the things that we've done over the last 5 years to focus on retaining a strong, highly qualified workforce, the programs we put in place, the way we've approached it. And we are now included as one of 11 utilities across the nation that are case studies for how to do it right. So you go on the EPA website, you type in workforce compendium, and I think we're on page 84 or something like that. But it's a pretty cool acknowledgement nationally of the work that we've done from a workforce perspective. So we're excited about that. The pipeline injection project, also known as the biogas project, is running and making money for us. That money is slowly offsetting the cost of the original investment, and right now our estimates are anywhere between 2024 and 2027, depending on what the RIN market does. Our target right now is probably sometime in 2025. We believe that we will fully pay for it, and then revenue that comes after that will essentially be profit from that system. So we're a couple of years from that. We've learned a lot in how to run a system that's the first of its kind in the Excel 10 state service area. So we are becoming experts in how to do pipeline injection. So much so that Jamie Sofoko, who's one of our deputy directors, spoke at a regional conference in Arizona about biogas and was there with a representative from San Francisco, which San Francisco is implementing the largest biogas project in the nation right now. And she was providing input for some of the pitfalls to avoid and how to implement them. So it's kind of cool. It's an exciting project, and it's really passing that point of starting to pay dividends. We've been doing some legislative activity actually at the state level. This came out of a tour we did with state legislators, and it's essentially a wipes labeling legislation that essentially basically says that non-flushable wipes aren't flushable because non-flushable wipes cause sewer backups in the collection system, and then they also wreak havoc on our mechanical systems. And so it's not saying you can't buy them, it's just saying you can't market them as flushable. And we followed a number of other state legislatures who have done this in the past. It's just a good practice for protecting our infrastructure. And we got that through, and I haven't heard if it made it through both houses. I haven't heard if it's been signed by the governor yet or not. We've been pretty active in this legislative session. actually our Deputy Director Blair Corning actually testified in front of the Senate last week because the Department of Health, Public Health and the Environment is trying to raise fees so that they can staff up, which we think is a good idea. Because they don't have enough staff, and so what happens is our permit, which is supposed to be on a 5-year renewal cycle, it's our discharge permit, which is the big thing that regulates us. Supposed to be on a 5-year renewal cycle, and essentially what they told us was, you're going into we're hitting our renewal right now. We're not going to get to it for 5 years. So you go into what's considered what's called an administrative continuance, or it's administrative. And so basically, you can't do anything. So the reason why is because they can't get to it, because they don't have staffing to help us get to it. So we support the outcomes of them funding the right staffing levels to provide the level of service that we need based on the regulatory pressures that we face as wastewater and frankly, water providers as well. We ended up securing a grant for $100,000. It was called a pitch to pilot. So it was 3 of our staff essentially did a pitch for the Bureau of Reclamation national. So there were teams from across the country to pitch the pilot that they wanted to test. We had 3 people at South Platte that pitched biological phosphorus removal. I know the title was actually far longer than biological phosphorus removal, but it's basically a way to treat phosphorus that's less chemical intensive. And they won $100,000. So we are getting that money and moving forward with that as a pilot. And then probably one of the most important things that I've done in my career is a comprehensive safety rollout. So South Platte Renew, we've had a couple of years ago, we had a close call. We had a contractor that was working on site. So the reason why we have a biogas system is because we generate methane, and methane, as we all know, is a very explosive gas. And the problem with methane in its normal state is odorless and colorless. You don't even know it's there. And so we had a contractor working on one of our digesters that had a valve, that had a gas valve that as they started doing the work, they left it open. And so what it did is it backfed gas into this unmanned control area. But fortunately, we had a detection system that detected it, alerted us, and then they immediately purged out the gas and mitigated the risk. But it really illustrated the dangerous nature of the plant and the complex. And essentially, we were one detection system and about 10 minutes away from some kind of a catastrophic explosion. So as a result of that, I stopped all construction for 3 days. This was February of 2021. I said, we have got to change our approach because that shouldn't happen. There should be systems in place that ensure that a contractor working on site doesn't leave this valve open. That precipitated basically a 2-year process, the first focus of which was on construction. We have a very intense process now of job hazard analysis and method of procedures process that is adopted out there every time we do a construction project, that it goes through every risk and mitigating every risk in a methodical approach for every project. But then this translated to how do we move so that when you walk on site, you walk in and you think this is a safety focused organization. And that's a hard thing to do because, and so if you've ever been on a mine sites are, you walk in, the first thing you are hit in the face with is, metaphorically, is safety. It's how important safety is. If you're ever on an oil and gas site, same type of thing. If you're in a refinery, same type of thing. My experience was Kiewit Construction. If you ever walk on a Kiewit Construction site, because their work is so tied to their safety record, their ability to win work, they have a extensive safety program. I said, how do we do that for our organization? And essentially, a team worked with a consultant, internal team worked with a consultant for the last year and created what we call SPR Safe. And we have a logo, we have, if you walk in to our lobby, you'll see a poster where everybody signed their commitment to safe practices. We've got safety training programs that are much more defined. We have PPE requirements. It is just, you could tell it is part of our culture differently than 2 years ago. And I think it's been one of the most rewarding and also impactful rollouts that I think that I've been a part of. It's been pretty impressive. Okay. So you can see we spent most of our capital, 15.477, and we spent 13.38. That's that 93%. We returned 2.1, essentially 50-50. That goes back to the 2 city sewer funds, and then we'll reuse it. We ended up experiencing some significant changes in commodities pricing last year. Chemical pricing went through the roof. And so we've adjusted for our budgets moving forward, but you can see that underspend in capital actually helped us mitigate any issue from a commodities perspective. Personnel, we're always facing some amount of openings. There's a certain amount of openings that I've kept open because I'm not necessarily sure that just rehiring the same position is an effective use of funds. And so for an example, a couple of years ago, we took a position that was a historic position, and we converted it to a midstream gas process engineer. Someone who understands the gas industry, not a water engineer, because we now have a gas system. And so we hired someone that is focused on industrial gas processes, and that's been remarkably helpful for us. And so we don't necessarily just refill positions because they go vacant. We look at them, make sure it's appropriate, and then we'll sometimes modify. And that example is just a recent example of that. But you can see, essentially as a total, we returned about 2 million to fund balance. So we've actually got to the point where we're spending what we're budgeting, which is essentially where we should be, because if we're spending what we're budgeting, it means we're not overcharging for services and we're not overspending the appropriation. So I think we've talked about a lot about regulatory uncertainty. Our PFAS issue on the SPR side is our biosolids application. If that gets regulated, that could be really a significant problem for us, because right now we land apply it on the farms, we beneficially use it. Depending on how those regulations shake out, it may say that we have to landfill it. So you basically take that whole aspect of our system, which has been renewing, and turn it into something that just sends it to a landfill. So we're paying close attention to that. That's a national issue. That's not just us. You can see some of the increasing costs. Chemicals and energy are 2 of the things that hit us. We use a lot of energy out there. We have a lot of electricity out there. So I think, what are there? There's about 10,000 homes in Englewood. South Platte Renew uses the equivalent of 2,600 homes in a year. So it gives you kind of a sense of the energy draw of that plate of the facility. Contractors and supply chain has been a challenge. Actually, what we're finding with contractors is our projects aren't big enough, so they don't bid on them because they've got bigger projects. And so what we had to do is we shifted our approach to packaging projects to make it big enough so that some of the qualified contractors who can work on our site will actually bid on them. We've actually developed a strong working relationship with PCL Construction and have evolved away from bidding things out to a 5-year relationship with them that we will reevaluate every few years, because the last few major projects that we were sending out, we were calling all the contractors we know and say, "Have you bid on it? Are you going to bid on this? Are you going to bid on it?" Yeah, we'll look at it, and then we get 1 or 2 bids, one of which was unqualified. And then fortunately, PCL has worked out to be an extremely good contractor. They did the Kempe UV project. They did some of the other projects that we have going as well. And then recruitment and retention. That's same kind of thing on the South Platte, or same thing as the utility side. So aerial view of where we're focusing our projects, you can kind of see, I think this is essentially what we've got coming up, and you can see some of the details about budget. Right now, our most significant project that we're moving forward with is an expansion to our operations complex, modernizing our control room, modernizing our workspace for operators and our process maintenance group. You can see that building right under where it says, you see the little square that's attached to the big rectangle? That's a largely abandoned former solids handling building that we had people officing out of, and it just wasn't ideal. The first step of this project is in June. We're gonna tear that thing down and get rid of it. And then it probably needed to go 15 years ago at least. And so we're gonna finally do that. As you can see, some of the other process, we're just continually moving around the processes and doing work to keep them updated. That was a lot of information.
It was good. Yeah, any further questions? Comments?
I always enjoy the insight, Peter, that you bring to this, and it makes me more confident knowing you're in charge of our water system, so thank you for that. More of a generic question, and early on, we talked about some of the ramp up time for projects. So we've got our water fund, we assigned $10 million to a project for this year, and it doesn't happen until next year. From investing in an asset location, does that money that gets assigned stay in the water fund? Does it get moved someplace else? And knowing with short-term rates where they are, is there any opportunity for more investing of those dollars, especially in situations where projects get delayed and we have knowledge of a $8 million delay at a 4% rate? That's a significant chunk that wasn't available last year with the interest rate environment.
So I'll answer the first part of the question, and as it relates to short-term investing, we haven't really looked at that. It's a really good point because you can make a lot of money off your money right now. It goes back to the water fund. So it all stays within that water fund.
Stays in there, and then New Year rolls around, and if it doesn't get used, the request. And this is almost a redundancy of requests that we're talking about as well, because if we approve something, or if council approves something this year, and through no major strategic change, just happenstance with the project and moves to next year, council has to re-approve that as well. And that's where I'm thinking, especially with the interest rate environment, is there opportunities to be still watching duration, not chasing rates, but get a little bit more out of the funds than just where they're currently sitting.
Yeah, is there a 20 million CD out there that we can?
Multiple jumbo CD, and yeah.
Did I heard?
I don't think CD is.
I was just kidding.
I don't think we can, I trust that we probably do not invest in CDs because FDIC, the insurance only 250,000.
Yeah.
So we invest in monies called Colo Trust Plus.
Okay.
It's a special type of investment. It's very conservative.
Gotcha.
That's why we do not invest our money in CDs because FDIC.
Yeah.
I was joking about CD.
Well,
The rate is really high. I
It's
have
like
the
5% right
same
now.
question.
Yeah, it's, well, and then you move into money market funds and other
That's the
places
answer
where
I got,
it might
yeah.
be, so. Yeah, I don't know what we can do around that, but that'd be really interesting, especially as it relates to some of those large projects that get pushed, because that's an, low hanging fruit, especially if we can retool it where we don't have to, talking as we talked last year, capital projects, approving projects to completion, not this annual approving based off of the budget and tying it a little bit more into that.
One of the benefits of WIFIA and why we went with it is we can push off the draw on that.
Uh-huh.
So we have a 5-year period that we have to initiate a project and a 7-year period that we can draw on it. So what Sarah's been working on with the sewer fund and the water fund is delaying that draw as long as possible because we don't pay interest until we draw it. And so if we've got cash in the bank, if we had an original draw schedule that was over 5 years, we might compress that down to the last 3 years to essentially draw down the fund balance and then push out when we start drawing the WIFIA and then drawing the WIFIA funds to then replenish to then utilize it moving forward. So
Makes sense.
we're looking at it from a deferring paying additional interest. But ultimately, as it relates to short-term investing, yeah, that's I don't know, I'm out of my league. I would defer to Jackie on that one.
So how many CDs can you buy with 20 million?
20 jumbo CDs at that point, I think is right you're looking at.
And if you haven't listened to the meeting last night going over the capital projects, and I think, Member Nguyen can't mention it, but you all listed out, you know, what was identified by WIFIA. So as we go through it next month, it is nice because you know, it just gives you direction and guidance on what's, you know, what's being pulled from that versus other areas. So
Yeah,
that will be helpful.
if I can actually, I skipped over this, but, so lead service lines, it's a lead reduction program, which is essentially the approach to lead is get it out of the system. So we have been working at what does that look like and what makes sense for what we can potentially execute on. And so we think a 10-year program, so over the course of a 10-year period, get rid of all the lead. With that, Sarah has worked for the last 2+ years, getting WIFIA in place, getting a certain amount of rates to cover a baseline program, and then going after this infrastructure money. And so the infrastructure money there's two forms of it. There's principal forgiveness, and then there's low interest loan. And so what we're looking at right now is our rate models have figured out how to address a quarter of what we identify as the program. So we think there's $80 million. We think we've got it funded to somewhere around 20-ish, 20 plus or minus, with our programs the way they are now, which is where the infrastructure money comes in. The value of that infrastructure money is the principal forgiveness. But what happens is you still have that debt that you have to take on for the remaining infrastructure money, that as we start to layer that on top of the WIFIA loan, some of our loans that don't retire until 2032, and then if we add a new loan for to do this accelerated lead removal program, we start to get into an issue where we have debt service coverage issues in 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, which is what we're now working on, trying to figure out the best approach to accomplishing two things. One, getting rid of the lead, and two, figuring out the way that's most cost effective for our customers to be able to fund getting all the lead out. And so that's something that over the next year and a half, we're going to be figuring out how to move from. When we put the first financial plans in place 3 years ago, we said, we don't have the lead service line program funded with this because it would blow up our rates to the point where we can't do it. So we funded it at a baseline level of $1 million a year, which $1 million a year is essentially 100 lines a year. We think we have 8,000, so you can see how long that would take. So that we then layered in WIFIA. And so WIFIA has $19 million, but it requires $19 million of match in order to access that $19 million. So part of that comes from fund balance. Part of that comes from SRF, which provides part of that matching funds. And so that is in our financial plan. So that gets us to the point where we can generally fund about 2,000 removal, and we think we might have 8,000. So it's that remaining amount that could be anywhere from 2,000 more to 6,000 more that we're not exactly sure, that we need to first figure out what is the number. Is it 2,000 or 6,000? And then build a program and a set of options that we can bring to this group, the Water and Sewer Board Council, to say, if we want to get rid of these in 10 years, here's what it looks like in terms of a bill impact. If we want to get rid of these in 15 years, or we want to give them 7 years. And we're not there yet, but what we've done is we've found the money. Now it's figuring out how to fund the money that we found to be able to address this program far faster than we probably would have ever had we not found WIFIA and SRF. So that's something that over the next year and a half, as we move into the 2025 timeframe, we'll have an idea of what we think that looks like to create the best program for our customers to get the lead out of the system, but also to minimize the impact on the bill. Because as a strategy, our 4.5% per year is basically there to normal operations of the water system. And so we don't want to spike that, but we recognize that there's this big issue that we have to address, which is unique to us, but in the grand scheme of big issues in water systems on the Front Range, it's actually one of the smaller versions of a big issue for water. If you go down to the South Metro area, they're trying to find water, and the cost of finding water versus the cost of removing lead service lines, because Englewood was smart in the 50s and got the water. We'd much rather have that problem than we need to be finding water. So it's a preview of what we're working on in the background to try and, basically to try and fix all these competing issues. I meant to talk about that under lead service line, sorry. But thank you for letting me.
That's good information.
And now I'm done, I promise.
Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you all again. This was very helpful. Very good.
Yeah, thank you for the time, and I know it took a lot of time, but I appreciate the time to be able to.
Good.
You cover a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
All right.
We appreciate your time and sharing.
Yeah, we appreciate you all.
All right. Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I promise you next time in front of you will be short.
So I'll move on to members' choice. We had a couple things that came up. One, I just wanted to say, if you didn't listen in yesterday or weren't there, definitely listen to the presentation. It was great. Next month, we'll dig into it and start providing our input, which I think will be due right around the end of the month or 1st of June to council. So we'll have about a week-ish there, I think is about what we had last time to kind of go through that. One thing just to consider, and not to talk about tonight, but with the bond measure, which was very informative, I think there's going to be a survey coming out to the citizens, and then I think it was June, it goes back to council for some further discussion.
I think
it was June. But as we're going through that next month, from our perspective, I was thinking, maybe we even supplement just our, spreadsheet back to, hey, what's our take on the bond measure, just to provide that back to council, if that would be helpful. We could just, even if it was a paragraph or so, we could give our perspective on that, because I think.
We did that with the police.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that this would be a good one.
So should we include that note with the capital projects report or wait till our annual report to include it in there? Because I think the police, we get included in the annual report.
Yeah.
We didn't call it out in the capital projects.
Yeah, I thought about that, and my opinion, and open to what folks think, is, well, it probably ends up being both. But I think if council's gonna be having a review in June with Parks and Recreation again to discuss it, it might be helpful to say, hey, here was our take on it right now. And you two, please chime in. If it's not, then we won't, but that was just a thought I had.
actually, I think that's a great idea.
So, and I missed last night, I haven't got the recap. This will be a ballot measure coming up or an internally approved bond measure?
No, it would be a ballot measure. And it's a $50 million ballot, so it's significant.
In November or when?
Hopefully, yeah, that's their goal, I should say that is their goal. But I mean, I know questions were already coming up from council on it, where money was being spent and how, and, it's significant compared to, I think member Ward might have brought it up, but it would, compared to the $20 million bond-ish that it's replacing, going to $50 million bond, I mean, it's a lot, and you start comparing, the parks to what they're, to revenue generating, like Pyres Cove. It was good discussion. I'm sure a lot more to come. But, anyways, I thought maybe we could provide a little something with that.
And I'm thinking of like what information would be useful as into is 50 million the right number and the right components of that makeup? Because to me, there's two elements of it. There's capital projects this year, which we obviously need to address. But this is planning for future years, plus we don't have certainty of what it is. So I don't want to spend too much time before we have citizen voting on it. But if there is insight you guys need into creating, is this the right ballot measure? Is this the right dollar amount? Is this the right things to include it?
Yeah.
That's where I think it would be more appropriate for this earlier stage.
Yeah. And that's
Beyond that, I think everything else would fall to the annual report to generalities around it.
Yeah, I think it was more, to me, it was more what's included in it, the amounts, those impacts either way. If, council voted for it or against it, or at least as it was presented yesterday.
This,
I thought that might, might be beneficial because they have a detailed plan on how they want to use the money. So from a citizen perspective, it might be interesting to provide some feedback there.
Right, and I appreciated Mayor Pro Tem's position about if we go to a $50 million bond issue, it's gonna take more chunk out of the citizens.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
Especially with current interest rates, your point as well, too.
That's another one of the questions is, the city has only so much debt load that it can carry, and we're not close to that number right now. But if we take another $50 million out, is parks the appropriate target, or are there other places where we would like to see that money spent? That's a much larger global issue that I think your feedback on that would be helpful. They came to us with a pretty compelling proposal,
Yeah.
showing exactly what they intended to do with the money. But right now we don't have a lot of data to inform us on, just the general perspective of how citizens feel about prioritizing those particular items.
I think another complexity for me as I was listening to the presentation last night was it seemed that there were a number of items, and I can only recall the train because I'm a little bit foggy today. But they're wanting to replace the train from its current, I think, gasoline mode to an electric train. And there was discussion, for instance, that train could potentially be funded out of the Broncos Stadium money.
Yeah.
Rather than included in the bond measure. And I think there are a couple of other examples that the counselors cited and the parks director herself cited. So I think that's another added element of complexity to it.
Yeah, there was some upcoming flexibility that they may have on some items. And then you get into the maintenance, or I think I asked a question, but about the train was, well, if you don't support that, here's what it looks like from a maintenance perspective. And I'm sure there's, safety involved with that too, as they talked about, but there's other aspects as you start kind of peeling that back to consider.
And then I think the last component for me at least is when we look at the capital plan for this year, absent any bond funding, there are a number of parks projects on there. But when we looked at the bond proposal for parks, a lot of those same projects are on that bond proposal. So the consequence potentially of drawing bond funding would be to free up a significantly larger chunk of capital expenditures that we could focus on other areas. So information on how you would like those pieces of the puzzle to slide around and move would also be informative for us as well.
And that's what was on my mind last night, is exactly what you just said. So I was thinking as I go through my own personal assessment, when I do an option A and option B is if this bond proposal goes through and if it doesn't exist at all, what my suggestions might look like.
Our response kind of takes that tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 approach, where tier 1 is things that we think should be approved in the current confines of the budget constraints. Tier 2 is projects that we would prioritize for new funds immediately. We talked about this last year with just, this is kind of that forward planning, saying these 15 projects that are tier 2, we as a council or as a committee feels that should be moved up. And now you have a line item of those next 15 that you can start to swap in mathematically if you want to earmark it towards Parks and Rec, whatever feedback we get from the citizens, similar to what we did with earmarking the funds for alternative policing, because we knew it would help release funds back to the police department. We find out, okay, these are our next 15 projects. They represent X dollars. We now know that you as council can do the, moving around of those parts, but that keeps us a straight line without having to get too complex in how we're analyzing it.
Yeah, I don't think we need to go crazy on it, but maybe just high level thoughts.
Just maybe a little bit deeper into not just hit this year's capital,
Exactly,
but
yeah.
go to the next step to say if we have an extra
Yeah.
5 million, this is where we would value. Does that align with what I think would help you?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yep. Okay, and I think any pre-work we can do will help just things move along next month.
Kind of even thinking ahead, I like how we ended up last year on where we all had the chance to identify our own dollars, show that diversity of thought, that not everyone's in agreement, but also here's what the averages work out to be.
Yeah.
So if we use next time to talk about both of these two, the week after to all do our final summations, and then we can aggregate it all for the final.
Yeah, I think it was a great setup.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was my first year, but
Better.
I think it gave a pretty nice representation of our job and what we were actually here to do.
Yeah.
Give all the consideration to every project that it deserves.
Because last year it was almost like we got to that number and then it was just done. We didn't go deeper into this, and this gives us a chance to go deeper, which I'm really excited about.
I do hope, though, that we do some sort of a collective exercise as we did last year. So I think I was a bit of a dissenting voice in that I was not so much in favor of, individual committee members' viewpoints on priority, and was ready to compromise, I think. And if my, perhaps top item was not the will of the committee, I was willing to go along with, I think, the will of the committee. Because I think there is a certain strength to the committee presenting a bit of a collective voice on these things as well. I mean, I think there's room for both, Josh, but I realize I'm a bit of a dissenting voice on this, but.
Well, and my thought is like not losing the collaborative nature that you're describing. Like we come down and we talk line by line, here's how we feel all this, I would prioritize it, I wouldn't prioritize it. Then we take that data to the individual, scoring system. And so that's kind of where my view is. Does that balance what?
Sure.
That group discussion is super, super important, especially as it relates to, even if we draft up, here's our agreement, and then you all go make your own individual one that shifts off of that. That might be a different approach to thinking about.
Yeah, I guess my feeling is we consider as individuals, but we speak collectively, right? And if the four of you have a priority, I'm going to support that as an example.
I don't know. I think calling it out that it's not 100% vote amongst the committee is important data, especially as council is considering factors that we are not considering. So I do like having both included in there, and I think it's good for those dissenting votes to have the opportunity to speak out as a dissenting vote, because that is good information for council to process. What they do with it, that's where we put the trust in them and provide the feedback to a guy like, hey, we have one person believe in this, but it's a lower priority for him. Even that additional context, I think, would be useful, where we don't lose those dissenting votes, but we also show that collective answer.
Yeah, I think our answers, our directions last year, or our outcome last year was pretty in unison.
Yeah.
I mean,
Last year was also easier because we had, 3 million more than what we'll have this year. So that's where, now we have,
Became a little bit
we have
easier.
3 million less because of that pavement, but yeah.
Well, and I think most importantly, when the presentation was made to council, it was a collective presentation. So I think that's
Sure.
very good.
And thank you to the council and staff for including us yesterday and supporting us in the discussion, upcoming here. So the other item I wanted to bring up, Min-Q has resigned his position. He's just got a lot of things going on, and he needed that time. So he resigned effective yesterday. So I think that'll be posted as part of the current application process. So if you know anybody, please start.
I'm sorry, I don't have to say today. I just haven't been around. Wouldn't Peter slide into?
Yeah, that was my next thing. Well, but I think we could get an alternate member, right? Because so if you want to, next month we could do a vote where you would be a voting member, to keep you honest here.
I would like to move that.
I was gonna say.
We can do it. And you mentioned maybe do an official one next month.
Yes, or we can do it now.
Let's do it right
Let's
now.
do it now.
I second Josh's movement.
If we can do it now,
As long as Peter is in agreement.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's what we want. We just want to make sure you weren't considering leading or doing or running off or anything like that either.
All right.
So yeah, if we can, all in favor?
Absolutely.
Aye.
So then we'll have a hopefully new alternate member come summertime.
So Josh moved and who seconded?
I think I did.
And Suzanne, okay, thank you. Just to
Only
keep us
Just
on.
keep us in there. No, thank you. End of the day, we're just trying to push things through,
I think you've been
But
the
when
most
you,
active.
when you write the.
Officially our first one bit too, so it's a pretty, yeah.
Well, it's important to me, and I've enjoyed being here, so thanks.
Yeah,
okay, do you need a letter, or do you need a letter then, or,
we're gonna find out, because the person who knows what the actual process is out of the office
Okay.
today, so that's why I couldn't,
Okay.
that's why I said, oh, let's just move it to next.
okay, no, that's fine, yeah, whatever.
Oh,
you-
yeah, we'll follow with the internal process.
And then, James, just a reminder, you don't have to answer now, but, you know, whether you're gonna ask for a renewal or a new term or not.
Well, since we put Peter on the spot, I will answer you now. Thank you for your very nice message. Bill reached out to me, which I really appreciated. And he assured me that folks were not annoyed by my electronic presence. And I apologize, my last 3 meetings, I think I was in Montana, New Mexico, and Arizona. But looking at my calendar, I think I can be here well into the summer physically, which has been great to be back. So I'd love to and be honored to continue serving. I just need to know what you need from me. Do I need to fill out a new application,
Yeah.
interview, all of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So then you needed a letter from me,
Yes,
right?
well,
Okay.
we need to get the
Great.
letter of recommendation.
But does he need to interview?
I don't think an interview is
Well, it
needed.
doesn't have to interview, but you have to send the application, yeah.
Okay.
I'll send you notes. Yeah. I'm happy to do that.
Well, thank you all. I'm honored to continue.
We're glad to hear it.
Especially now that Peter's on board.
That was the deciding. Okay, those were the member choice items I had. Does anybody else have any items for tonight?
Just a quick kudos to you, and you're the only one I could see on screen, so if others were there, thank you. Oh, Suzanne, not
I was
surprising.
there for a fraction of the time.
Okay.
Well, I came in for the rest of the meeting too, pretty much, because I was like, well, I'm here. So.
Well, you guys were troopers. Thank you for being there,
Yeah,
and
thanks.
representing the committee. And
Well, thank you. Any other items?
I would like to think about ways that we can streamline our capital improvement project recommendation process. So I might be reaching out to you guys via email and copying Jenny, to see if we can take some of it offline and do some work between meetings without,
I don't think we'll get through it in an hour and a half.
right,
You know,
right.
yeah.
But what's on my mind now is like, if I can even collect scores, so to speak, and somehow compile those, and then we can review and have dialogue in a meeting. I don't know what that's gonna look like, but I guess I just want to share with the group that I'm thinking about that, and I might be presenting some ideas with you
Oh,
via
that'd be great.
email between now and the next meeting.
Because I had actually, well, thank you for offering that. Because I had thought too, it's like, could we do some individual scoring before, heading into the May meeting?
Yeah.
Because that might help speed things up, because we'll get deep. I mean, we did last time, and as we should. But maybe that would help. And maybe force us a little bit to start looking at it in advance, if we set a date for ourselves or something.
Right, in the individual scoring, if we all share that, we find that we're unanimous in some areas, we don't need to talk about it. We can focus on those
True.
things where we're
Yeah, that's a
split
good point too.
3-2, so.
Yeah, I think a little prep would be nice.
Yeah.
am I recalling correctly, did we have some sort of a format or a tool for scoring last year? Was that,
We will send you out an Excel spreadsheet
okay,
that will list the
Yeah.
projects, and then there is a prioritization tool that was presented by Deputy
Yeah.
City Manager Tim Todd. And so we'll provide you that information as well. And we have a new capital review committee that's being formed of representatives
of staff from each of the departments who will also be providing you scores. So I just don't know the timing of when that information is going to be sent out, but it's going to be sooner rather than later because the various boards, commissions, and committees are meeting starting next month, which is next week.
Yeah, because I think we each individually put our, well, not necessarily rank, but the amount associated to them, and then we had kind of a collective back column, if I recall, is how we did it last year.
Well, we had one opening discussion that was square.
Yes, yeah, and then I think we put our amounts on there and then kind of went back there again. So. Okay. Any other items? All right, well, we are adjourned. Thank you all for staying late tonight.
Yeah, thank you.
I just sent you an email.
Thank you.
Say goodbye.
Letter you wrote from
Manager.
James.